Chinese women became kind of like the scapegoats of society. You know, we were vectors of disease, spreading syphilis and what have you. You know, we were immoral. We were like tearing apart the fabric of society. You know, we couldn't uphold good Christian values and this idea of like true womanhood, which is like based on like Christian piety and all this stuff. So as a result of these attitudes, there was a congressperson called Horace Page or something from California that proposed the Page Act, which prevented all women of East Asian origin from being transported into the United States for lewd and immoral purposes, quote unquote, such as prostitution. And so by doing this, basically they conflated like all East Asian women, Chinese women in particular, as prostitutes and sex workers, right? And then they also were like, oh, but you're being transported into the country, so we're like actually protecting you in this paternalistic way.
So they're like patriarchs that are protecting you from sex trade.
Yeah,
but like, you're just coming for work.
Yeah, it's like you're just erasing the whole swath of people just trying to like, you know, eat. And then they were just like, yeah, let's just use sex workers as like a way to cast this like to pass this discriminatory policy, because no one's gonna stand up for sex workers. No one's gonna stand up for a prostitute or a whore. And then once that was in place in 1882, like 7 years later, they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act that basically prevented all Chinese from entering the States up until like 1943, when they needed to cozy up to China for World War II purposes.
Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm your host, Javier Proenza, and today my guest is Kim Yi. And we're doing a crossover episode with, what is it? Boundary Issues?
Boundary Issues,
Boundary Issues on K-Chung.
Yeah, I don't really have an intro.
You don't?
I guess Boundary Issues is just a radio show where we don't have any boundaries. And so we just kind of chat as if nobody's listening.
Okay, but I mean, that could go many ways. If it was like a bunch of dudes, it would have a different connotation, right? Like,
like they'd be date raping each other? Or like?
I mean, I'd like to give them a little bit more credit. I know, I'm just like, what kind of topics do you guys usually cover?
Yeah, it's like so I started this with Veronique d'Entremont, who's another artist.
Okay.
We went to UCLA together and we met in the sculpture department. So we became like sculpture siblings. And we trauma bonded in grad school. And then after grad school, we were
Is there any other kind of friendship in grad school?
I don't think so. But if there is, you didn't really get the whole grad school experience.
Yeah, I haven't been to grad school. I've just interviewed a bunch of people.
Yeah, everyone's kind of twitchy.
Yeah.
After we graduated, we were like, we're having a hard time finding time to hang out and spend time together. So we're like, well,
let's regiment it.
Yeah, so what are workaholics to do? Let's take on a radio show.
Yeah.
So thus is the beginning of Boundary Issues. And it was a way for us to like check in on a more structured basis. And we would talk about things. I think our early episodes were like, you know, mortality, spirituality. We talked about dating, death, transformation.
So not MMA, not like that's what I was like. It would be more Joe Rogan if Boundary Issues.
Oh, I see.
And it'd be a little bit more alpha and a little bit more like raunchy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we get raunchy in our own way.
Is there like do you guys have to worry about the FCC? Are you allowed to curse on the air?
I think we can do whatever we want on air.
How does that work? I don't know.
I have no idea.
Well, we're on K-Chung right now for people that are not listening to the live broadcast of K-Chung. We're right outside the Geffen, which I wanted to put a camera out there to like shoot the building, and I was like, no.
Oh, yeah.
So someone just runs away with it. I'm not that trusting.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting broadcasting from here because you always hear like sirens and helicopters and just like the ruckus of the neighborhood. Yeah. So I thought it was really funny just to have this like open air. Basically, we're in a shipping container with some windows cut out. And it's just such a funny place to like be doing recording and radio, especially if you're talking. I think most people here probably DJ and play music. But yeah, whenever I'm doing my show, which is just, you know, people blabbing away, yeah, we always get a lot of ambient noise and people coming up and asking questions. How do you get into the museum? What are you?
Yeah, so we're not just doing a podcast and a radio broadcast. We're also here as an information desk, it seems like. Exactly.
Yeah, it's really fun to misdirect people.
Well, do you mind if I take a bit of a lead and interview you a little bit? You said you had some questions, so we can hand it off to each other.
Yeah,
I definitely. I don't want to come into your house and be the host. But so like maybe I can ask you some questions that your audience might not have, because like any awareness. So you told me before you came here when you were around 5.
Oh, to the United States. We're going way back.
Yeah. We're gonna do your art origin story, like how this is where we're starting. So you came. Okay. When did you start to? You came over to the U.S. from where?
From China.
Where in China?
I was born in Beijing, China.
Okay.
And my parents came over first. Actually, they immigrated to the U.S. when I was about 1 and 2. So I stayed back with my grandma, which is, I think, fairly common for at least like Chinese immigrant stories, you know, where like the parents come in and get established first.
Yeah.
And then I came over when I was 5 with my grandma, and we landed in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my parents were in like engineering grad school there.
Oh, okay.
And then, moved with my mom to Illinois, and so that's where I mostly grew up. Midwest.
Midwestern. Okay. Yeah. And then when did you start like realizing that art wasn't going to be a problem and disrupt the rest of your life and get in the way of your happiness if you weren't making it?
Yeah. When did my addiction start? I see.
When did you realize you had a problem? We're not precious about art here.
You know, it's funny because somebody once, like my husband is not an artist, and so his friends are all like kind of business people, and they were trying to understand what I do like in the beginning when I went out, you know, and we had dinner or whatever, and they're like, oh, like, so do you like make money off your art? Like, how does sales work? And I was like, you know, it's complicated. And I basically was like, yeah, I don't really, you know, I can't survive off my artwork. And they're like, oh, so you're like, it's like your hobby. And I was like, fuck you. Strangle. But it kept like circulating in my head, and I was like, no, why wouldn't I describe it as a hobby? And I'm like, no, it's like more of a habit or an addiction. Yeah, like
it's a practice.
Yeah, but like also something that you feel maybe compelled to do.
Yeah.
Even at the expense of other areas of well-being in your life.
Yeah. Which is what you would like, you know, destructive to the rest of your life is how you describe addictions, right? Like if someone wasted their life on alcohol the way that we have on art, they would call it an illness, right?
Yeah.
Which is funny.
Yeah. So I think I really started to take art seriously. I was my junior year in high school, I went abroad and I lived in Spain for a year with a host family. Yeah, and that was like a really challenging experience for me. I didn't really speak Spanish when I got there, you know.
How's your Spanish now?
I was fluent when I came back, and now I'm like, okay, I'm like decent. I can get by, you know. I can talk to my neighbors who only speak Spanish. But yeah, I'm not at my 17-year-old peak of Spanish.
If you had moved to Miami, you would be still, because you would have more opportunity. That's one of the things that was shocking when I moved to California was like, first of all, how many, and it has to do with like how many generations of, you know, like second generation kids are not going to necessarily be speaking Spanish as much.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to like necessarily speak Spanish to their parents. So, and even within my family, like my dad, my brother calls my dad Papa, and the rest of us all call him Dad. Oh,
because he's the oldest?
He's the oldest, and I think he lived in more Latin American countries growing up, because he lived in Costa Rica, and you know, that's less in although my Spanish accent, I think, reverts to a Central American accent when I speak Spanish, because that's where I learned. So I don't sound like a cubanazo, you know, like with that fluency. And my English used to be sound like I was a Spanish speaker. Like non-Spanish speakers in Miami have an accent that makes them sound like they are from, like, that they speak Spanish, but they don't. It's just the local.
It's just from living in Miami.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
You said you lived in Rome.
Yes.
How old were you when you came over to the
12
US?
years old.
Okay.
And I came over right during Hurricane Andrew. I don't know if you remember that one.
I don't remember that.
It was like the biggest hurricane catastrophe that had happened before Katrina. Like it went over Florida, and everybody was like, "Oh, Florida's fine," and then they realized that it had hit Homestead, and like destroyed it. I heard stories of people like hiding in the bathtub underneath a mattress for safety.
Damn.
So I moved that weekend. We were fine. They just
Like, what the fuck?
But then then I started to have like a passionate relationship with hurricanes, because it's like when society fails, like, and then everybody has to kind of cooperate and understand each other, which is not what you think of when you think of Miamians typically, but is pretty collaborative. And the only industry that still works is the drug business. You can still cap.
Yeah, the whole city trauma bonded.
Yeah. That's exactly what it
Yeah.
is. Yeah. And like there's no lights, so you like pull up on a tree and you're just like, oh shit, it fell. Like there's like fallen trees on the road, but there's no light, so you like don't see it until the very last minute.
Oh damn.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So have you ever been to Rome or just Spain?
I mean, I've been to Rome, but like as a tourist, but what I was saying was when I was in Spain, I felt like, I met all these kind of bohemian people. And, the lifestyle's just different there. Like people live with their parents till they're like 26 or like married, you know, like there's just a different kind of ethic going on.
Now people do that here too.
That's true. But it wasn't seen as like a negative thing, Like I went to Spain at a time in my life where I was like just an overachiever. I was like, captain of whatever, like soccer and like cross country, straight A's, but I was like so depressed. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to Spain, I saw all these people like kind of like, not overachieving for lack of a better word, but like hanging out in cafes, talking about Marxism, drinking beer, smoking hash,
taking siesta.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh, like you don't have to like earn your way to being a valued individual. Yeah. And so I feel like that was kind of the beginning of like, Bohemian Kim, and I turned to art a lot during that year because, I was processing things and didn't have a bunch of friends. I really had to like integrate over time into the society. And yeah, I think that's when I started to take it like seriously and really like use it as like a daily kind of practice or orientation to the world.
But you weren't there for art school or anything. You were just doing a study abroad.
No, I was in high school. Yeah.
Oh, so you were like, so then you went over there and then they sent us an exchange student?
Yeah. I lived with a host family and then their kid got to come to the U.S. I think they ended up in like Wisconsin or something. Oh man,
that's rough.
Yeah, I was like, oof, okay. I mean,
the land of serial killers.
Yeah, the land of, I don't know. Anyways, I think I got the better end of the deal.
Yeah, for sure. I bet he thought it was in his mind, because like the U.S., I remember when I was like a kid and I told my friend that I was going to Miami and he goes, Miami Beach. And I was like, it's a beach, but like it's so built up, especially in the 80s.
I mean, I think like that the U.S. has done a really good marketing job. You know, it's like this guy was like in the middle of like Wisconsin, but he loved it. He was like, oh yeah, we like, he has a hat, like one of those like fisherman hats, and then there's like beer bottle like lids like chomped around the edge of it, like you like take your teeth and like and it was like
folded in half and then crimped on the hat. Wow.
Yeah, and that was like his like souvenir or his like kind of like token from that time that he still like has and holds on to and like has good memories about. And there's like prom and malls and all these things that are just like circulated in like the ether of like globalized entertainment industry, and it really does make it like larger than life, even though it's stuff that we're like, this is like kids trying to grind in a school gym, it's like it's more than that. It's like a myth too.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that like all those countries have like really good dubbing industries. Like the dubbing industry in Italy was amazing. So they would, all the movies we would get in these really easy to digest formats, whereas like everything that comes over here is dubbed terribly, and then and then you just have to read subtitles. So I don't even watch, like the only foreign films I watch are Italian ones. First of all, because the old ones are really good, like the Antonioni and all of that stuff. But yeah, it like Netflix at one point just became all foreign entertainment, and I'm like, I don't want to read. It's
hard to watch when you're sleepy, because then once your eyes start to droop, you're like,
Or like you'll be watching something, you walk into the next room and you're like, oh no, I have to pause it.
Yeah.
You know, like you just forget all those details.
I do appreciate the Korean entertainment that's come over so far.
Well, that's one of the things, you know, that's one of the countries that has the most soft power next to us comparatively. Like that global entertainment infrastructure is like, they're really, like they overtook Japan and all of that, you know, and Japan was like the fetishized cultural stuff that like for when I was a kid. Do you remember Score TV?
No,
on MTV?
I don't remember that.
It was a TV show, but it was like, it was the cool stuff, like 1990s, like late 1990s going into the millennium was like kind of the peak America for me.
Oh my God.
They were playing drum and bass in like, you know, commercials and stuff. It just felt like the future was coming. Y2K was a
Y2K. Oh my, I remember Y2K. I recently watched the documentary about Woodstock 99.
Oh, how is it?
Oh, it's rough. I mean, it was a really good documentary, but like, you know, I came of age in that era too. You know, I was watching like MTV Spring Break with like wet t-shirt contests, Singled Out, you know, all those like MTV shows, like raised by TV basically. And then like, so Woodstock 99 was kind of the culmination of that era where it's like Fred Durst, Korn, Eminem, like this whole huge lineup of like music festival, only 2 female artists, which is like Alanis Morissette and Jewel, like the most random, you know, I mean, they were huge stars, but like very
doesn't match the rest of the lineup.
Yeah, very different vibe. But yeah, basically they just like laid out how the whole festival like fell apart and imploded out of like kind of like white male angst, you know, like these dudes in cargo shorts are basically just like tearing plywood off the, you know, infrastructure, and then like crowd surfing on top of the pieces of plywood, setting shit on fire, groping women, like the whole thing was just like a total and complete, like, you know, testosterone infused like explosion of like you know, shit, you know. And I was like,
literally
wow.
too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like the porta potties were all fucked, like all the infrastructure was fucked up, the showers were disgusting. Anyways, I was like, oh yeah, that was the era. That's, you know,
that was the death of it. Yeah, it sounds like.
I mean, I think it kept going for a little while after that, but it just really like threw into relief, like taking a step back, like this is what raised us, you know. And like I look at like the Gen Zers now and the kind of like more fragmented media that's out there, you know, just with social media and the internet and YouTube and stuff, and I'm like, oh well, no wonder everyone's like, you know, queer, non-binary, like defining their own like, you know, kind of lanes. It's like we only had like 2 choices, it felt like, growing up, you know. And I'm like, it had
and you were very scared that you were on the queer side. Like, you know, I was like super anxious of an experience.
Yeah, no,
like,
you don't wanna.
Yeah, it was like, I mean, now I it's nice to imagine of a kid that like even just turned out to be straight and didn't have all that anxiety about like the possibility of not, you know.
Yeah, like, totally.
It affected everybody. No one got away from homophobia back in those days.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, totally.
But it's interesting. I feel like I'm maybe like 4 years older than you. We don't have to disclose our ages publicly. Although,
what's your Chinese zodiac sign?
I don't know. I think year of something.
Well, yeah, you would be here or something.
My cultured response. But I like all of that was I'm a Gen Xer by like 1 year, right? So I feel like the Korn and all of that stuff kind of missed me. Even the Deftones, like all that new metal stuff was definitely part of that. My 2009 was, like you said, in rebellion to the monoculture. So I was like really into drum and bass and stuff like that.
Were you a raver?
I was a hard raver.
Oh my God.
You can't tell I got the Air Maxes.
Is that a raver side?
Well, no, the 95s are the real raver ones.
Okay.
The Air Max 95s. And I remember when those came out because I wasn't buying Nike at the time. Another thing from our generation where like we boycotted stuff because of labor, and now we're just like, my iPhone is made by slaves.
But I need it. How am I going to post, though?
I literally just touched my pocket and it wasn't there, and I realized, like, I had a moment of panic, and I realized we're shooting with it.
Like, oh God, there you are. You're okay.
Yeah. Well, do you like? Can we talk maybe a little bit about your practice? Is that something you feel okay talking about?
Yeah, I feel great about that.
Okay, so then you said you do performance, right?
Yeah, so my background is in like sculpture and I guess installation as well, you know, kind of like worn sculptural pieces that involve performance. And then I think just gradually over like the past 10 years, I kind of started to use my own body more, and then got into like video making, performances for the camera. And yeah, so now I'm kind of like in that area of like live performance for the camera, film.
And you did a performance here, which you told me a little bit about.
I did, yeah. It was the working title. Well, maybe it's the actual title whatever. We're going to refer to it as Food, Fertility, and Border Control. Okay. And it's a Costco shopper analysis.
Border control.
Yeah. So,
okay, let's do the whole thing.
Yeah, so I used the Costco. So I read an article in Business Insider where the average Costco consumer was a 39-year-old Asian American woman who is married, has a 4-year degree or higher level of education, and makes over $125,000 a year. And so I read these and I was like...
do you make over $125,000?
Well, so I read them and I was like, these all sound like me except for one. I'm like, oh, this is like that party game, like 3 Truths and a Lie. You know,
it's because your 4-year degree is in art.
Yeah. Yes. I invested 6 years into my current, income level. So, yeah.
And the debt? Is it still there, or is it paid off?
No, I'm debt free.
You're debt-free?
I'm lucky to be debt free. Yeah.
Is that from your husband's side?
It's not. No, okay. I paid off some of his debt actually.
Oh, what? Okay, yeah. So then you're not that far off of maybe it's like 100,000, but not 125.
No. Well, UCLA was interesting because it was like free basically if you're in state.
You went to UCLA?
Yeah.
Okay.
So UCLA ended up like equaling out with your TA-ships and things like that. And then in the performance I also talk about like well, maybe I should like just back into it. Okay. Go for it. So basically I use the analysis, these 4 statements to like delve into like these issues of food, fertility, and border control, taking this kind of like fun fact of Costco shoppers. And then like, I'm like doing basically a stand-up set, but not as funny. It's like me and a microphone and like laying out like, okay, I am, who thinks I'm 39 years old, an Asian American woman. Do we think this statement is true about me? And people are like, yeah. Or some people are like, no, because they don't want to like offend me because of the age or something. But I'm like, no, this is true. And then I basically just like walk backwards. Like I was born in 1984. My parents were born in 1956. We were born in China. This is what Asian American means. And so kind of like through this like personal history, I get into like Asian America history, Asians in society, and so eventually I get there by talking about kind of like this $125,000, the last fact, which is all the 3 other ones were true and this one is false.
Wait, so do you have kids?
I have 1 kid. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a 2-year-old.
Okay.
Shout out to Bo.
Shout out, Bo.
Mommy loves you.
You will never understand how true that is.
Yeah, it's really intense.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm talking about this 125K mark, and like, that brings me to talking about like artists and how we make money to survive in the world. And basically, I'm kind of like, well, my first gen upbringing kind of taught me how to hustle, and kind of get money for myself because my parents were never going to give me any. Yeah. And one of the ways I talk about doing that is that I actually donated my eggs back in 2008 through a company called Asian Egg Donation LLC. And so
I'm sorry, that sounds shady.
I mean, it kind of is.
Just the name and more than anything.
Asian Egg Donation. I know. That's why I like to say the whole thing. Yeah.
Was it in the back of a van?
No. It was, very professional. It was basically like a website, and then it's like they're basically running like a personals platform. Where young Asian women can upload images of themselves, fill out profiles, it's basically writing out like a long ass MySpace profile of yourself. It
also feels a little bit like Hinge or Twitch. What's the original one?
Okay,
Tinder.
Cupid.
Yeah, Okay, Cupid. Like where you're like, because the appearance element of it.
Yeah,
right?
like you list your interests, your accomplishments. You upload your. I had to give my high school transcripts, my college transcripts, my SAT scores, my ACT scores, if they even have that anymore.
Do you have any like mental health things that you had to disclose, or?
I did not at that time. Those mental health issues came later.
Hey, you took the money and you ran. I like it.
Yeah, so I mean, from that experience, I was able to get like a nice chunk of money to kind of like live off of. And
how much does that pay? Like 100,000?
No, not at all. It was like 10,000.
Okay.
Yeah, but like when you're like 22, that's like 100,000.
That's a year's worth.
Yeah,
worth of pay.
like you're like, I'm fucking rich, man. Like beer's on me tonight. Yeah. And I did it twice actually, and the second time I asked for more money and they gave it to me. So I mean, it is a very shady industry where I actually listened to a podcast about it earlier this week. It's a podcast called This Is Uncomfortable, and it's like stories around money and how money makes things kind of like messy. And it was in it, and they interviewed this woman that donated her eggs like 6 times.
Wow.
And which is kind of like the max that they recommend that you do it. But there's like very little regulation about it. Other countries do have more stringent regulation, but in the US it's kind of like, if whatever the market wants to pay you and whatever,
there's a weird fetishization too, though, I'm sure.
Definitely.
It reminds me of like Madonna going into Africa and getting kids, and then in a more dark way, I know they did Operation Baby something in Vietnam, where there was like literally set up so that people could be adopted, like orphans could be adopted and sent over here.
Oh wow, yeah.
It's Operation Baby something, but anyway, yeah. Like there's something crazy about that.
Yeah.
Did you hear about the guy that got in trouble for donating sperm 500 times?
He got in trouble for it.
Yeah, because the problem is inbreeding.
Right, you're like, dating people and you don't know that you're like have siblings.
Yeah, that happens in Iceland too. There's like an app for
Oh,
it.
right, yeah. There's like a registry. I've heard about that.
But I think the idea is that all those 500 kids will not know, and like it's just like I just can't imagine ejaculating 500 times just period, like as
really?
I mean,
you don't think you've ejaculated 500 times in your life?
I think I have, but I'm just saying in a sterile environment and like 500 trips to the donation bank. That's a lot.
But it's getting paid to do something you're gonna do anyways, probably.
You know what? You've turned me around on this.
That's what I loved about the egg thing, where I'm like, okay, like I'm already ovulating. I'm having a period every month. Like,
but that's less.
Pay me.
But that's not. That's already happening. Like I think that like there's something.
But I had to shoot myself with hormones and stuff like that. So
you didn't have to masturbate in a room with like. It's just a different dynamic.
But you have your phone.
No. I'm just saying that it's a different vibe, like, right? Like the extraction process.
Oh, like, are you saying that maybe donating sperm might be considered like sex work?
Well, now that you put it that way, that wasn't even where I was going with that. I just think it's like an interesting difference where it's like you're already making it sound less fun because you have to take hormones, like where we just go and do, like you said, do something that we were already gonna do. Yeah. No, like the phone thing doesn't bother. I mean, I don't necessarily.
No, it wouldn't be to bother you. I mean, okay.
Yeah.
All right. See, this is good. Now we're getting to the boundary issues part where I'm like, how do you masturbate?
I use a reverse grip.
Or the stranger, it's like you sit on your hand and it's like numb and you can't feel it.
I wonder if anyone's ever done that.
It sounds really difficult, actually, to have control over a member you can't feel. Anyways.
Yes. Anyways. So, what in terms of contracts with that? Like, you don't know where the eggs are going. Like, you have no rights to the eggs once they're sold, right?
Yeah, I don't have any rights to them. I'm not their parent or anything. But I did like advocate for like an open exchange. I don't know what the term exactly is, but to make my information available to if should any children be born of these eggs, they can find my information. And so, I mean, I know for sure that one girl was conceived. And so she would be like 14, 15 right now.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, we'll see. Like, you know, if she's anything like me, like, I would want to know, you know, if her parents did tell her, like, her origin story. You know, I would seek me out, but, you know, it's like, we'll have to just see what happens.
Do you think that if you were them, do you think they would be disappointed or excited? How do you feel about, like, you know, or like meeting you?
Oh, like how the kid would feel about how they were conceived?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of variation, you know? Like, I think some people who are, like, donor babies do have a lot of questions around their identity and feel like, oh, maybe this was a selfish thing for, you know, my biological mom got paid to, like, you know, basically make me.
I mean,
you know,
I resent
and I'm
my
not
parents for
getting
giving me
shit.
life sometimes, you know?
Yeah, no, none of us asked to be here. I mean, I think that's an interesting thing too, right? Like, as a parent, where it's like, kids, there's no consent conversation around even existing, you know? And then once they're in the world, it's like, you have to do everything for them, you know? And so there's not that ability to have that conversation or that, like, to get consent, you know? So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's all just, like, fascinating because it's all very, like, messy, murky, and also, like,
shady,
yeah, but also, like, loving and tender too, because it's like these people really wanted, and the reason that Asian egg donation exists was, like, there was a shortage of Asian donors, and so when Asian couples are trying to, like, make a baby through IVF, like, how are they going to find someone that, like, kind of, like, looks like them, you know?
So do they mostly serve people, like, it's not for white people to, like, be like, hey, I want something exotic?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
that would be really weird, but I think, to my understanding, it was mostly geared towards, like, Asian American kind of, like, couples who wanted to, like, have a baby that kind of looked like them. But I don't know that for a fact, you know? And would they have turned away people if there was, like, two blonde people trying to have, like, a half Asian? I mean, I don't know. That's like that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
But yeah, the whole, like, industry of, like, baby making, it's like I'm learning more about that. And, like, you know, people who were adopted, like, transnationally, like, from Korea or something. It's like, yeah, there's, like, people that are really pissed off about being, like, just, like, purchased basically, you know, by somebody that's, like, completely outside of their culture and brought to, like, America.
Well, I mean, I've known white guys to be raised by Asian parents, like, which I had never even really thought about that.
Well, really?
Like, I mean, it's just, you know, people, you know of a person, right? And like, it's.
I don't know of any people.
I know it's an ex's ex, so.
Interesting.
And I was like, oh, really? And yeah, but it's crazy because even within, like, especially Latin American families, like, there are racial tensions between siblings who look darker skin. Like, I used to coach soccer, and when you said you played soccer, I wanted to know what position you played. What position?
Center mid.
Oh, okay, so you got ball control.
Yeah, I'm like, give me the ball. Let me distribute. Yeah.
But, like, yeah, like, I remember one of the coaches or assistant coaches, like volunteer coaches, was roasting her brother as being adopted because his skin was so much darker. And, like, it's just it kind of goes back to the what we were talking about with, like, when it was nerve-wracking to, like, when the homophobia was everywhere, like, where racism is everywhere like that, it's really hard for it to just stay outside of the bounds of your family.
Oh, you know? yeah. Like, I mean, in Chinese culture too, you know, there's like a hierarchy between light-skinned and dark-skinned Chinese, you know, and I think a lot of countries have a history of this, and it's still, like, playing out.
In the Philippines, they have skin whitening creams. And,
I mean, that's all over Asia, and, like, whitening, brightening. I think there's some even marketed to, like, the black community. anal bleaching. I mean, I guess that's for everybody.
Yeah, let's not bash anal bleaching. Everybody deserves
draw the
it.
line somewhere.
That's not racist.
But like I mean, I think that's the thing my art is like really concerned with, right? It's like this like division or lack thereof really between like our private stories and our personal narratives and these like larger kind of like historical trends and ideologies and hierarchies and power dynamics. It's like I think a lot of times there is a division in the law, in popular culture, in so many ways between like what we do in private in our own homes and then like legislation and public space, but really the two are just like very much intertwined.
Yeah.
And so it's like with the performances and works that I engage with are like very much trying to like trace those relationships and kind of give them some kind of visual form or description. Yeah. I
had an artist named Anna Iwataki on the show, and she talked about her topic was genealogical disclosure, which was a really interesting thing that which is that like over here, like obviously Asian people are a minority, but within Asia they're not like the homogeny exists in a way that maybe doesn't necessarily exist in like global South countries, right? Like where colonialism has like set two different like mixed races, like in Latin America there's a lot of like white Latinos, and then there's but it's interesting, are there dark-skinned Chinese people? My dad's pretty dark. Okay. Yeah. And then is that but he's Chinese or okay.
Yeah, so I took a 23andMe a couple years ago, and then I was like, yeah, I think I'm just like Chinese and like a little bit Russian, and that's exactly what came. Like there was no Vietnamese or like other kind of Asian countries. It was just like boom. But yeah, my dad's from the south of China, so Sichuan province, and he's more darker skin. I mean, he looks like he might be like Southeast Asian.
Okay.
And so and when I went back to China, and I was going back before COVID, people would think I was like Thai or like Pan Asia interpretations, but very few people thought I was Chinese. Just I think the way, because I presented myself, I had like dreadlocks at one point, very embarrassingly. This was like 20 years ago, but nonetheless, we were like, oh, you can't be Chinese.
That's interesting.
But yeah, there's a lot of variation,
so there's a lot of ethnic diversity.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ethnic groups, It's like the Han group in China is like kind of the majority, but then there's like the Hmong and like, so many more groups that I'm not familiar with enough to name, but like, the people in Tibet too, so. Is there like colonization? I mean, obviously there's Hong Kong and whatnot, but did that spread to other colonies? Like was colonialism a thing in China? I know very little about China. Yeah.
I know about the Cultural Revolution, like maybe some. Yeah,
it's like I'm actually teaching myself Chinese history recently too. Yeah. And so to that, it's like, so there's the Opium War in the 1800s. I was researching the 1800s, and I'm kind of researching that time now in like China and the US, because like so many people came over to the US during that time for like the gold rush, and I was like, well, why did so many people come to the US? Like what made you like leave all your shit behind and just like go clear across the Pacific at a time when that was like, what the fuck, you might as well just disappear,
Yeah.
And it was because there was like what was called like the century of humiliation, where it was like the end of the last like dynastic rulers in China. The Qing dynasty had been ruling since like 1644, and so by the 1800s they're like pretty out of touch with like the population, what's going on. People were there was overpopulation. There was a series of droughts that ended up in this like huge famine in like the 1870s, and at the same time, we had Britain in there doing the Opium Wars because as a way to basically try to fill the trade deficit between Great Britain and China. Like more people from Great Britain wanted to buy things from China than people in China wanted to buy things from the UK, right? So they're like,
And
well,
was it mostly opium?
yeah. So they were like, so they got people hooked on opium and was like, okay, this can be our export now. You know, so that was kind of like, you know, it's like this
Wait,
drug.
who decided the British decided this could be our export now?
Yeah.
Okay, so they just wanted to take the whole game.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's like, you know,
it's like a street gang, like street gang, like, you know.
Totally, totally. And then so that happened. I think that's how they got Hong Kong, actually. Fact checked me on that one. And then Qingdao was like a German colony that was like on the coast, but I'm not sure how that one came about. I haven't gotten that far in the research yet. And then Japan was also in there during that time. So there was a lot of just like...
Japan was doing dirty deeds
for
a long
there was
time.
a lot of shit going on in China in the 1800s, I would say.
Yeah.
And and also like, you know, some people are like, you know what? China are like the colonizers of Asia. Yeah. You know? And so...
Well, what's interesting is that like during the Second World War, we were more afraid of Russia invading China than, and like we did, that's, some people say that's why we dropped the bomb to like on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not because we needed to end the war and we're trying to stop a war but just kind of to show the Russians like, hey, maybe leave Manchuria alone, which is interesting. And like one of the things that I find really interesting now, especially with all this stuff that's going on with the war, is like people like calling Russians like white as if it means the same thing as like a white person from over here. Like ethnically, they're very different, right? And it has to do with the proximity to China, and just the whole Eastern Bloc is like been isolated for so long, you know. Like the Soviet bloc, like people couldn't travel to the West, so it's an interesting. Like I always find that like conversations about race are very much within the paradigm of America's like relationship to slavery and all of that, but like white people kill each other over ethnic issues, right? Like like they're not. So it's interesting because race is a construct, yes, but it's also like something that people hold very dear. Right. Yeah.
Well, it's like the boundaries shift too, even within America, you know, it's like the Irish weren't white, the Italians weren't white at some point. Yeah. You know, and there was actually a lot of intermarriage between Chinese men and Irish women at one point.
Oh, wow.
Because Chinese women were excluded from immigrating into the U.S. In the 1870s.
Is that because they didn't think that the labor was of enough quality, or?
It was because, so basically in like the 1800s during like the gold rush era, in the West, prostitution was legal. You know, people would visit brothels and it was like no big deal. And like there were white American women working in brothels, and there were also Chinese immigrants working in brothels. But there was also an anti-Asian sentiment at the time in the West of like, all the Americans being united together because we're like, hey, at least we're not Chinamen. You know, this is our land. Like, get the fuck out of here. And so because of that double like racial misogyny, Chinese women became kind of like the scapegoats of society. You know, we were vectors of disease, spreading syphilis and what have you. You know, we were immoral. We were like tearing apart the fabric of society. You know, we couldn't uphold good Christian values and this idea of like true womanhood, which is like based on like Christian piety and all this stuff. So as a result of these attitudes, there was a congressperson in called Horace Page or something from California that proposed the Page Act, which prevented all women of East Asian origin from being transported into the United States for lewd and immoral purposes, quote unquote, such as prostitution. And so by doing this, basically they conflated like all East Asian women, Chinese women in particular, as prostitutes and sex workers, right? And then they also were like, oh, but you're being transported into the country, so we're like actually protecting you in this paternalistic way.
So they're like patriarchs that are protecting you from sex trade.
Yeah,
but like, you're just coming for work.
Yeah, it's like you're just erasing the whole swath of people just trying to like, you know, eat. And then they were just like, yeah, let's just use sex workers as like a way to cast this like, to pass this discriminatory policy, because no one's gonna stand up for sex workers. No one's gonna stand up for a prostitute or a whore. And then once that was in place in 1882, like 7 years later, they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act that basically prevented all Chinese from entering the States up until like 1943, when they needed to cozy up to China for World War II purposes.
But then, all Asian Americans were in the internment camps around that time, right? Or they weren't like, oh, you're Chinese, you're good.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. But going back to one of the things that, it's really interesting that you assumed that you were part Russian. You know?
I am. Well, I know I am because...
But how do you know that?
Because my mom's grandma's Russian.
Okay.
So their story... So this is how, like, history and, like, family and, like, my body, it's, like, all, like, one thing, right? It's, like, so my mom's grandma's Russian, and she came to... she met my Chinese grandfather, like, on the border of, like, China and Russia, where they were both working. She was, like, teaching Russian to Chinese people in, like, college or something like that. And her family ended up there because... of the Bolshevik Revolution, so this was like, I think, like basically like the communist uprising in Russia, when they were like overturning like the last, like, what do you call it, the emperor or the czar of Russia, Nicholas something or other, the Romanovs. And so my uncle told me, like, yeah, their family, their last name was Romanov. Oh wow. So they had to like get the fuck out of there, you know. And so that caused her to flee to Harbin, which is where she met my grandpa, which is then she had these like mixed blood kids who, they grew up in China and they faced discrimination for being like foreigners. So it's just like, I don't know. It's just like really interesting how these like political movements just like force people to like move their bodies to find safety, and then you're like, oh, and then they fucked, and then like that's my grandpa.
but one of the, like, it's so interesting, especially now with what's happening with like BRICS. Do you know what BRICS is?
No, what's BRICS?
So Russia, there's an alliance between Russia and China and Brazil, and everybody in the world wants to be part of this, because it is an alternative to American unipolar hegemony and the U.S. dollar. So basically, like recently, China just brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is unheard of. And so when it's really crazy talking to like Americans that don't see the full scope of it, but of course these cultures are next door neighbors. They're gonna intermingle and interbreed even. Yeah. But as as a powerhouse nowadays, it's really an interesting thing. They're doing, like, China's doing a lot of crazy stuff, or crazy I think it's positive. A lot of people are like being alarmists about it, but like they're being much nicer to Africa than we've ever been. Like, they're not killing their leaders. They're like, and so recently they were asked, like, some African leader was asked to like trash or if they would arrest Vladimir Putin if he went to Africa, and it was like, bruh, get out of here with that shit, So like, it's interesting, the American narrative about these two countries that are like super evil and nefarious, and I'm like, oh, you know what, if they get in power, it doesn't seem like they're gonna fuck Americans, because like what we do is we starve countries, right? We starve countries, and we say that it's so that they'll rise up, but people that are starving can't fight and revolt against the government. So what ends up happening is brain drain, which is the only reason, I've just recently come to terms with this, the only reason we do that. We like, I'm from Cuba. My sister just went back recently. There's nobody between the ages of 18 and 40. Oh, wow. Anybody that has the potential to live a life tries to get out of there, know? And like, you look at Ana de Armas, who's like a huge celebrity. I didn't even know she was Cuban. And she like left to Spain. She acted in in movies or in stuff over there, and then slowly made her way over here. Yeah. But like that is how, like, that's so crazy to me. Like how we how the dialogue of like anything that's not American. We're so suspicious of China. I'm like, yo, China, like, we just sent all of our jobs there. That's why they're doing well.
Yeah. I mean, China's doing fucked up shit, and so is America. You know, it's kind of like, well, you're just vying for power and influence, and it's not good enough just to influence your own country within your own borders. You have to be you as a country want to control like the landscape, the global landscape of, ideology of what's going on, so that you can then exert more control and have a better position and stuff, you know.
But there's different ways of doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And our way of doing it is to have bases everywhere, and then be like, why are your boats why is your country so close to our bases? Which is kind of the beef that we're having with China right now, which is interesting. But yeah, like, I think that what gives me, like, I know that China and Russia are not good places, especially like Russia for queer people and all of that. But there's something to be said that all these global South countries are like trying to get on board, you know, because there's a better deal for them. Whereas like we're just like, we use the IMF to like kind of keep people trapped in deals that are gonna screw them years and years down the road. And like this alternative's coming, and everybody's like, we're with China.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, why are they in such like a compromised position in the first place? You know, colonialism, imperialism. Exactly. You know, it's like we fucking did that shit as America.
We are doing that right now. You know, like Libya, we overthrew because they wanted to nationalize their oil and come up with the dinar. So like, I mean, right now, it's always funny to me when people that don't live in Russia or in China but live in America are always talking about how evil those countries are. And like, I'm like, you know, like for me, you know, like not to be anything, but like Antifa is interesting because they never protest the FBI, they never protest the CIA, they never protest like the real fascism. They protest, they go and they protest like people that are homophobic, which like, okay, that's fine, but you're not anti-fascism. You're you know, does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know much about Antifa, so I have nothing to add, unfortunately.
There's some really problematic video footage of them. And I'm a leftist, you know, like, so I'm definitely against fascism, but I don't think a lot of people even know what fascism is.
Yeah.
I think they just like, oh, you're a right-winger, you're fascist. I'm like, there's other kinds of things. There's like authoritarianism, you know.
Yeah.
But so do you go back to China? Do you have like ties to your roots and stuff, or?
Most of my immediate family is here, and then I do have some cousins and uncles, aunts and stuff that are still in China, but I haven't been back since COVID. Yeah.
What's life like there? Like for somebody that doesn't speak the language, put me in the mindset of going home to China.
I don't know if I can do that. It's like so varied, you know, like the last time I went back was in 2019. I went back to Beijing, and I was filming for this video that I later made in 2020, and I was like filming in Tiananmen Square, which is like, you know, that iconic kind of like government plaza where the student protest happened in 1989. But when I went there, you know, it was like kind of to relive, like, I remember loving going there when I was little, like 3-4 years old, and just like running around this giant like plaza with like balloons, and like the light was always kind of cool, like. And so I was just like filming little kids like chasing balloons and in their cute little outfits and stuff. And you had to like walk through security to get there. But then I don't know. I guess it's like every time I go, it's also very different. You know, it's just always changing. And in a lot of ways, it's like I have very like it's not in my body anymore. That
makes sense.
To orient myself to the city, right? My husband actually, he lived in Beijing for about on and off for like 10 years.
He's Chinese too?
No, he's actually like a white American, but I don't know. He grew he got influenced by some Chinese friends when he was like in middle school and high school, and then he was like, I'm gonna learn Chinese, and then just like learned Chinese, and then like worked in China and lived there for like, you know.
Was that an appeal? Like, was that a bonus when you
met him? I met him, I was like, ugh, yeah, another white guy that's gonna be like, oh, ni hao ma, like, you know, like 3 words, you know, be like, fuck you, like xenophile. But like, he was legit, you know. Okay. He could like read and write, and then like we also just connected on so many other points. And then when it came to the point where it's like, okay, like I think you fit into my life and actually my family, you know, in this way that like, I don't know. We joke because I'm like, oh, together we make one full Chinese person. Like, I kind of like have the good hearing comprehension and like the, good accent, native accent or whatever, but like I'm not very good at reading or writing, and he can read and write. So we're like, oh, okay, great. Like now we can function as a full individual. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a lovely compliment that we have. But yeah, so since he would live there as an adult, it's like he has much more like of an orientation to the city. It's like, oh, this neighborhood's like this is like that. It's like every time I go back, I feel like I'm like kind of like regressing or something back to like a certain point in my life that was like very early, and also that makes it feel like, very tender too. Yeah.
What is it like? What are your favorite cultural memories of what? Because. Like, it's so hard to get around American propaganda to see what a culture really is like, you know, especially when they're just constantly talking about the one China policy and like that's all you hear about and how we're going to go to war with them. And it's like, they're people, you know? And like, I just find it interesting. Like, what do you, and then also there's like, for me, like, for example, most of the stuff that I know about China is probably propaganda of some form or other, so it's interesting to me to what was being a kid like there? Like, what did you play with? Did you have Nintendo?
No, I didn't, but I did watch He-Man and She-Ra dubbed over on TV. We had that. We had concrete floors in our apartment, and so I have memories of like drawing the ABCs and stuff like that with chalk, like indoors, going to the park, which is same I feel like here and probably most places. And then as an adult, I really this is so stupid, I really appreciate the massage and bathhouse culture. Like literally that would be like my nirvana. Like if I died and like could just be in a bathhouse for like the rest of eternity, I would be so happy, because it's like you go in, you get like a robe, there's a buffet, you can hit it as many times as you want, then you can just like get services like foot massage, like facial, body massage, and you're just like sitting in a recliner in this big theater room with like TV playing, you can like be on your phone, like it's just the bomb, and you can spend the whole night there, like doesn't close.
You definitely are from the 90s. You just said the bomb.
Yes, I am.
That sounds amazing though.
Yeah, it's it's like We Spa. I mean, if you've been to the Korean spas here, it's like that times like 1,000, it's just like on steroids.
Is it like more affordable than those kinds of services are out here, or is
there's like a range, depending on like if you're in a big city or like a second tier city, and then even within those cities there's like various types, but one
of the things that I assume is absent, because I've only been to the Philippines, but the Philippines is so culturally tied to American militarism that like there's like G.I. Joe burger. I mean, something like that. Like I forget exactly what it was called, but like it's like there's like Americana, but it's super militarized Americana. It's like it's camo kind of Americana. But I imagine that like that just doesn't happen in China.
No, not that I've experienced. Yeah.
When my dad, he worked for the UN, so he would travel there. And one of the things that was amazing to me as a little kid that just blew my mind is that because of the isolation, like people didn't really speak English, because he was in mainland, he wasn't in Hong Kong. And like to get around, he had to have like characters written out for him so that he could be like, this is where I'm going. This is my hotel.
Yeah.
Like that level of language barrier. I've experienced, like, going to France. I don't speak French, but like there's at least some proximity.
Yeah.
So is there like anything culturally different from America that like you're fond of, that you kind of, like, I wish we were a little bit more like that over here?
I wish everyone would take off their fucking shoes in the house.
Oh my God. That's a good call.
So
simple. I do that at my house just because LA is so gross, but yeah, that is a good call.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think just like the late night eating too. The last time I went, we were hung out with my uncle, and he was like, oh yeah, we'll take you out with some friends. And we went to drink night beers is what they called it. And you just like sit in a little shack, like not even a shack, it's like a little tent or something outside, like on the banks of the river, and you're just like drinking beers and eating kind of like the food that they grill up there. And it's like all different types of food. Like It was just like, yeah, it's like kind of like, I mean, it wasn't so dissimilar to like kind of like Spanish
Yeah, it sounds
tapas,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know, it's like a late night, yeah, gathering where you like snack and eat. And I feel like that is not really part of the culture here, you know?
I mean, I would have never guessed that it was so European, but that it does sound like you don't eat dinner until 10 kind of thing.
Yeah. And I just really appreciate the food culture and the enthusiasm for food in China. Like maybe now, like if I were hanging out with like peers or people younger, there'd be like a no carb or keto thing, but like people just like love to eat food, and there's this kind of like unabashed I don't know, enthusiasm for like
And the
chowing down.
the food is different than American Chinese food, right?
Yes.
Because you were
very
saying
different.
that when you had fried rice over here the first time, before we started recording, you were like, whoa, what's this?
Yeah, I remember really loving it because I was like, this is so different and good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very varied. There's like so many regions of China, like, you know, there's no one Chinese food,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which is maybe different than here where it's like you go to Panda Express and it's like, you know, the same 5 dishes that you're going to find at like, you know, the Great Wall or, you know, these other various restaurants I've worked in as a child. Yeah, but I mean, I still like the American Chinese food, you know, but, you know, it's like that food came out of a specific history too, where it was like back to the gold rush era, you know, where it's like there weren't very many women in the West to do these kind of like, you know, things like laundry or food prep and service. And so Chinese workers filled those gaps because they didn't want to compete with the white Westerners, you know, because they don't want to get persecuted or run out of town. So that's why there's like the ubiquity of like Chinese restaurants that cater to like non-Chinese clientele and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's like from that history.
In
of
Miami,
labor.
they serve Chinese food with plátanos maduros, like plantain, the
Ooh.
fried plantains.
Yeah, that sounds good.
It's like it's one of the things that I miss the most of like because
Wow.
the fried rice is a little bit different, but that is like one of those details where it's like it's so Cuban over there that they're like, bro, if you don't serve that, you're missing out on money.
Yeah.
You know, because I just don't remember ordering Chinese food and not having maduros with it.
That's so awesome. I love it when cultures like meld together in that
Yeah.
way, where they like find this like comfy little crevice where it's like, oh, we actually fit, you know? Like, I just think everyone should just mix together till we're all like, you know, around the same color. And then like, you know, it's like, why
But that's
not?
homogenous.
But, well, no, there's so going to be many shades. But, you know, I don't know.
Do you
Yeah.
know about chifas?
No.
That's Chinese. That's Peruvian Chinese food.
Oh.
So I don't know. There must be like a huge Chinese culture over there because it is like notorious that Peru
Really?
has its own blend. Yeah, chifas, own blend of stuff. Now I'm getting hungry. Let's not talk
Yeah.
about food.
You know what? I was in Ecuador like a couple years ago, and I did see signs that were like chiva, and it was like
Yeah.
Chinese food. And I was
Yeah.
like, what does that mean? It's not chino. Like, is that what it's for? You know?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's cool. I didn't know that there was like a specific that was specifically referring to like Peruvian Chinese.
Yeah. And I guess it spreads to other places, but yeah, like there has to be a Chifas place here in LA. I would be surprised if they didn't have one. You know, which is one of the nice things about LA.
Oh my God.
Definitely.
I love living here for that reason.
All right, so I get that you like to eat.
I like to eat.
What's your favorite cuisine?
Oh my God. You can't just pick one, you know? Like,
I mean, I love Italian,
oh God.
but in Italy, not here.
I mean, I think I just have to say Chinese because there's so many types of Chinese.
Okay.
You know, but I also love, you know, Japanese food. I like Ethiopian. I like Korean food, Korean barbecue. I mean, Mediterranean. You know, it's like I can just like name every genre of food and be like, yes, there's something
I
I
will eat it.
love in that.
Yeah. So then, where are you headed next? Like, what's in the cards for you in terms of your art career? Let's pivot back into
Okay.
the main the main thing that all of the people listening
what
probably have in common.
this thesis is about anyways. Well, right now I'm doing a digital residency with Asian Arts Initiative in Philadelphia. And so I'm like researching basically this, like Chinese American history, Chinese American artists, representation of Asianness in America from like the 1800s through now. Just like, why are things the way they are, like.
Why do you think that people, because I also have a very strong pull into like learning about Latin American history, which oddly enough is mostly American history. That's one of the things that I love to tell white people over here. It's like, you don't even know your own history because like you've done horrible shit to us. But what is it about that? Like, because and I think it has to do with, you were talking about your body and understanding your body and processing your body. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and why that's important, because I relate to that. Yeah.
I mean, I think, my relationship to art is always using it to understand kind of like where I am or why am I feeling this way? What is this? At first it was very bodily stuff. And then I think becoming a parent actually made me more interested in like history and just like lineages, because now I'm like, I'm part of like, I'm continuing some vector here in a way that I didn't feel before I was a parent, because I was like, I'm like the end of the line, like whatever, fuck you guys, like I'm doing my own thing. And now I'm like, oh shit, no, I'm like I'm passing something forward, so what is it that I'm passing forward and how did we get here? So I mean, I think in a very like embodied way, that's kind of piqued my interest in like going into myself and understanding, where do I come from and how did we get here? Why are things the way they are? And like the more I learn about it, I'm like, this like makes sense why Chinese people are obsessed with food. It's like there was a great famine during the Cultural Revolution and there was no fucking food, and no wonder my parents like love food, hoard food, encourage me to eat all the food, and now I love food. Like these things make sense and they become kind of like depersonalized in a way. And also like for the history of America too, where I'm like, I feel and I felt so much anger about why the fuck, like Trump, goddamn, anti-Asian, Chinese virus, all this stuff. And then it's like when I've traced back like the history of America, I'm like, this is like just how America does shit. This is par for the course. And like, it makes sense. It's not personal. It's just like America's always been this shitty. Yeah. And it's like actually slowly getting maybe less shitty, but it's like it's in its bones, like it's not personal to me. It's not even about me. It's like about them and their own issues.
America is an interesting thing. And it is interesting because you have to reconcile both, right? You can't just be interested in the Chinese side.
Yeah, because I'm not Chinese. I'm like Chinese American. If I go back to China, I think it'd be hard for me to like find my community or like my way through society there,
I've never been to Cuba.
Would you ever want to go?
It's a toss up to me. I'm conflicted because I know there's so much like very cheap sex tourism there, and that's gonna break my heart. Like it's like going back to a place that you've heard glorious stories of, and my sister went and she was very sad.
Okay.
Like it's heartbreaking. You're just watching. She went and there's no staples. Like my understanding now is that Cuban cuisine only exists in Miami because they don't even have black beans.
Oh wow.
And rice and stuff, like basic stuff like that. Yeah. So if they don't have black beans, they definitely don't have pork. Which is like a cornerstone of Caribbean food in general, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated history, and it's not resolved. If there was that period where Obama normalized relations, and he was like, and things like started to kind of move. They filmed the Fast and the Furious there, and like the design shops were starting to open up. Like artists were starting to, like, there was commercialism and consumerism, but then Trump came in and smashed that, and Biden is like an old school dude, so he's like also into the embargo. But I think that the embargo doesn't do anything but serve both the Cuban government and the American government. America has a villain, and then Cuba has a villain,
Right.
and they get to keep each other in power. It's a symbiotic relationship. I don't think it's as confrontational as it's portrayed, because both sides benefit from it.
Right.
You know, and like and culturally, you know, like I think that brain drain element is one thing that's just kind of hit me, you know, recently, because now you have people, like the immigration discussion has gotten so crazy because you have people that are being migrants or immigrants that are being brought into the U.S. and being housed by the government, and people are upset that they're not helping the homeless people. And so that's kind of what made me realize that the main thing with these sanctions and with these things is brain drain. If you take away a country's doctors, a country's, you know, and you make them flee the country doesn't have doctors, doesn't have intelligent people.
Yeah.
I play a game called Civ 6, right, which is like a world domination video game. It's thrown all my morals, like I do the worst things to people. Like everything that I object to on a moral standpoint in that game I do to, like, you know, dominate over other cultures. And one of the big elements that changes the flow of the game is the great people, right? So you'll have like John Rockefeller is a character in the game, and you get him, and then you use him, and he gives you more oil, access to oil. You know, all these little things, these people that are important, and we've been doing that to Africa for decades. You know, like Africa. One of the reasons that Africa can't help itself is because everybody comes here. Like you know, why would you stay and fix your country when you can have a decent life? You know, especially when the powers that are oppressing the country are so insurmountable for you that you could just, you know, if you can't beat them, join them, kind of thing. There's not even judgment in that.
Yeah.
But I really think that is kind of the mentality behind a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, yeah, the brain drain or the immigration trying to find a better life. It's like, yeah, what can you as one person do to, like, affect your destiny?
Your country's getting bombed.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
You know?
So in this video game, the Civ 6, can you be like, what happens if you enact the morals that you
can do a science victory, and you can do a religious victory. You can do, what are the other ones? Science, religion, cultural victory. So you can have so much more tourism than everybody else that you beat them. So
wait, it's a game where you play against other players?
You can. I've just been playing against the computer.
You play against the computer. Okay. So then it's like each game, how long does it last? Is it like...
I'm embarrassed to say.
Can you give us a range?
Have you ever played Risk?
No.
It's very similar in length. It's 500 turns. So 500 turns actually turns out to be a lot. I can do it. I can play maybe a game in an 8-hour in an 8-hour stretch.
Okay.
But I love that you're fascinated by it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because it's like this video game and like, you know, the metaverse like thing where it's like, oh, we're just going to make the same thing that we make in like the real physical world, but like in the metaverse or in like this other platform, this electronic platform. And it's like, isn't that boring? Like, don't we want to use it to see what other possibilities exist? You know, like maybe use the metaverse as like a utopian workshop space, you know, like what happens when everyone gets UBI or like, you know,
that's a good question.
Yeah, like, but why are we just reproducing the same shit here and then digitally? You know, it just seems so fucking boring.
You know, the guys that are trying to make, it's basically the new Fountain of Youth that they're doing with all of that. So it's like people that don't want to die, wanting to like make a space that you can live on in forever.
Oh my God. Have you seen this show Upload?
No.
It's on Hulu. It's like a dark comedy, but it's kind of about that. It's like in the future, in the near future, when you die, you can get your consciousness uploaded to, you know, various platforms, and depending how much money you have, like you either have this like amazing country club experience, the beautiful view and all this stuff, or it's like, oh, I only have like a 2 megabyte like upload speed, and so you're just like sitting in this like empty blank room, like glitching out, you know?
Well, what drives me crazy about the idea is like I would rather die and see what the mystery of life is than be trapped in capitalism for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, it sounds so boring.
You think that you're going to upload your consciousness and you're not going to have to work to pay for all this stuff, right? Like, servers aren't free. It's no one is doing this out of the kindness of their heart. Like it's a subscription fee, and if you don't pay your subscription, then grandma's gone.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's then you're like, you obviously it's the rich people doing this for the rich people because they want to stay up on the top tier for like.
Yeah, they just want to live forever.
Yeah.
But it's literally just like transhumanism is an interesting thing, but yeah, I think we got like 4 minutes before 3:00. Are you ready to start wrapping up?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, cool.
We did good.
Well, thank you so much for doing the show and having me on your show. It's been lovely. I always love these conversations that are about culture. I think two of my favorite things are talking to people about their culture and about how their religion traumatized them.
Oh, very interrelated topics.
That's when I am like serving my own interests, because like sometimes people want to talk about something that like I have to like stretch myself and be like, oh, okay, shoes or yoga.
Shoes. I think you have an entry point to shoes. You're talking about your Nikes.
Yeah, I messed up with that example. But yeah, shoes are like cars for people that can't afford cars.
Well, next time we can talk about counterfeit luxury goods.
Oh wow, do you consume?
I'm an amateur dabbler in the consumer.
Louis Vuitton.
Actually, Bottega Veneta, and then I'm gonna get a Celine bag too. That's on its way to me.
Wow, and like $12.
No, these are, what's fucked up? Like, it's still expensive because the original bag is like $2,500 and these bags are like $200. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'm like getting a 90% discount, but I'm still fucking spending $200 on a single bag, which is like unnecessary to say the least.
What is the appeal of the bag?
I think it's some kind of like class drag.
Okay.
Where it's like a comfort blanket. If I go into situations where I'm like with people like from that world, I'm like, oh, I'm one of you, but like not really.
Oh, I like it. So it's a trickster element to it too.
Yeah. It like keeps me true to my roots or something.
of being a remorseless capitalist.
Yeah, but I feel like at least it's going directly to the factories that make it, not to the European luxury houses.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, can we promote anything for you? What's your Instagram?
Sure, you can follow me on Instagram at Kim Yi. So it's just my name 3 times. You can also check out my website at kimye.com, KIMYE. Yeah, and then from there you can probably see what else I've been working on. I also edit for ladyscumbag.com, which is a art project turned kind of like a media platform that people can actually submit to if you're a writer or like a media maker. And
edit like text, your articles or what?
Yeah, they're like writings, and then also there's like we have photography and like visual art, poems, all kinds of things. Yeah, it was a project I started in 2018 that still like that exists as an archive and like a gradually, very slowly evolving platform.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, go check that out, and we'll be back next week with another guest with another topic that may or may not be art related. Thank you for checking us out.